which we feel may be one of the hardest revenue sources hit by this. We will be wrapping up this month, in just one more day. So we should have some information by the end of the week to look at what 3 months of 2020 versus 3 months of 2019 compares to. I spoke to the single tax office today. They estimated that we were up about $1.3 million in their collections, which consist of the of our real estate from last year. As you know, we've moved up the discount period, so we anticipated some cash in the door at a quicker rate, and we also levied taxes. So that increase was assumed. So, we hope to have some more information, and we're going to continue to evaluate our collections compared to the prior years as we move forward. But the cash flow in front of you, as I stated, does not try to make any assumptions on what the impact is, but it does show that under normal circumstances, the deferment of approximately $5.1 million of business privilege mercantile taxes from April through July is sustainable based on our revenue sources.
Thank you. Mrs. Yanni.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. It is the recommendation of the superintendent and the Budget and Finance Committee that the following is approved. Whereas, in an effort to provide relief to businesses struggling economically due to the coronavirus pandemic, the Scranton School Board, in concurrence with the City of Scranton, hereby approves extending the collection deadline for business privilege mercantile taxes from April 15th, 2020 to July 15th, 2020. Respectfully submitted.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
On the question?
On the question, did we get any justification from the city on why to change the date? Are they following suit with the federal government or any type of justification?
No, Pat, I think maybe you can speak to that as well. I did speak to Council President Gahn earlier today. He is planning to speak with the mayor this evening. I'm not sure that this is a decision that can just be made unilaterally. I think we need a little bit more communication about this. Certainly the school district has a bigger piece of this pie. And I agree with you, Tom. I would like to understand the justification here. I think as I'm very pleased that the legislation has required that we continue our employment situations, but that does make it difficult for us to lose any revenue or delay any revenue. I think we have to be very cautious about that and really understand this a little bit more. Dr. I feel like I've gone off on a tangent from your question there, Tom. So Pat, if you want to jump in at all, please do. But also Dr. Finan, you and I had a brief conversation about this the other day, and you mentioned some concern about debt payments.
Yes, and Pat can also speak to this. I know that we have debt service payments in June, but when Pat was looking at the cash flow, he did take that into account, and we can get through to July 15th. It would be nice if we could ask those who can afford to pay their BP Merc taxes on time to do it now, as opposed to waiting until if we decide July 15th. I also would have liked it to be June 15th only because of our debt service payment. But I understand the need to be consistent or with the city. So perhaps we need to say in our response that we would appreciate anyone who can make their payments on time, because we do still have to pay our staff, even though they're not in our brick and mortar buildings.
Month is our debts. Sorry to cut in front of Pat. I know he's getting ready here to also chime in, but what month is our debt service payment due?
Well, we have debt service payments scheduled throughout the year. Basically, they're April and October for some bond issues, in June and December for the others. Our largest payments are scheduled in June. We've budgeted roughly $8.7 million for debt service payments in June, consisting of principal and interest. I do believe that, over the course of the years, when they've structured the timing of these payments, they picked June for a reason. Like in most years, we've received the majority of our tax revenue. We've also received our largest share of our basic education funding. So again, it is, as Dr. Finan noted, it is built into the assumption of the cash flow as well. There's a few other big items that are happening very shortly that should be noted. The sale of our delinquent real estate taxes, something that's typically scheduled for around this time. We typically award it in April and try to close on it by May. We have received a proposal for that, which we're currently reviewing. The district budgeted about $4.6 million for that sale. So that's another, kind of a big once a year item that I think, is a factor in this. If we were to not close on this, again, fortunately, we did receive a bid on it. So we would like to be presenting that to you at our April 6th meeting, and you'll have some information in your monthly packet. Also factored into this payment schedule, again, in addition, as Dr. Finan noted, all of our payrolls and the continuation of making healthcare payments, paying all of our bills, we've not amended any of that, is our first installment of our tax revenue anticipation note payment. That has to happen before April 30th. So we are on schedule to make that as well. I will note that First National Bank, our treasurer who carries that note, has contacted me and, just wanted to see kind of where we were at. And, if there's any issues that arose to open up discussions with them. But again, that's a $3 million payment that has to happen by April 30th.
Dr. Finan, to your point, do you think that if we did not move the collection deadline, but instead suggested something like we would defer any enforcement efforts in keeping with the city's date, would that get the message across that you were talking about?
I think that's a great point, Mr. Malloy. I think that would do it very nicely, and we could just say that we are not going to enforce any delinquencies. I think that would get it across. I mean, after all, these are taxes from the last quarter, correct, Pat, of last year?
It's taxes due in 2020 based off of your prior year gross receipts.
Right. So that's from 2019. So I think that suggestion, Mr. Malloy, is an excellent one and would send the right message.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'd say I agree with Mr. Malloy. I mean, there was a couple things I heard there. Pat said he had some more information by the end of this week. I don't. Council hasn't had the discussion with the city, and we do have a meeting next week. When looking at this, I mean, I think we could do a friendly amendment and go with Mr. Malloy's suggestion, or possibly table this until the April 6th meeting, until we get some more word from the city.
I mean, I tend to like Mr. Malloy's friendly amendment, whether it happens today or next week, but I also don't have any problem delaying until next week if we would like to have more information, see what the city does decide to do. But I also would be open to simply making the decision this evening that we are not going to do this. We are simply going to defer the delinquencies. So whatever.
Same here. I can go either way, whatever the rest of the board would like to decide.
Well, more information never hurts, and the decision won't have any different effect if we wait a week and get some more information. So I think tabling is probably the smart idea.
Okay, at this point, I'll make a motion to table.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Mrs. on the question? Mrs. Orr?
I totally agree with Jimmy that deferring it for a week will not shake the foundations of the universe.
Thank you. Mrs. Orr?
Ms. Fox? Ms. Fox?
Sorry, it's not working correctly. Yes.
Okay. Ms. Hume?
Yes.
Mr. Malloy?
Yes.
Mr. McAndrew?
Yes.
Mr. Schuster?
Yes.
Mrs. Welby?
Yes.
Mrs. Yanni?
Yes.
Ms. Martin?
Yes.
9 affirmative.
I don't think I was asked. Or maybe.
Oh, Sarah, Ms. Cruz, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Okay, thank you.
Maybe the ocean breeze is blowing in the background down the way.
I hope it was very calming for everyone.
Mrs. Orr, am I correct that one of the people signed up for public comment has joined the meeting?
Yes, so
Okay.
I wasn't sure what to do about that.
Mr. Audi, would it be, there you are there. Would it be permissible to allow that person to comment at this time?
Absolutely.
So chooses? Okay.
Yes.
Mrs. Orr?
Vivian Williams, are you here?
I'm here.
You wanted to comment?
Yes, sure. Thank you guys so much. And I appreciate you guys making this happen, even in the world that we're at right now. And I think some of my questions were answered before. I've been in touch with a fellow parent. But my questions really relied on asking about technology. And I think that was already addressed. However, I'd like to make the suggestion that I do know that there's not enough Chromebooks for every student in the district. But as a parent of a 5th grader, I'm very worried about my child going into 6th grade unprepared. I have a family that does have access to technology, not the best technology in the respect of we do have iPhones and I do have a laptop, though I don't want my 5th grader working off a phone for Google Classroom. So I don't know how you guys are distinguishing who besides need in the respect of income and whatnot gets a Chromebook. But I think our 5th and 8th graders who will probably start a new school year in a new school with different teachers, a different building and new technologies should have a priority at getting those. That's really what my question was all about, was the technology and what the process was of distinguishing who should get it. And also about, I do have a child who has special needs, and I was just wondering, I do plan to ask if he can be held back due to this situation. I am remotely working for my career and have 3 kids at home who I'm trying to keep on a schedule and somewhat in tune with their schoolwork. But I wasn't sure what the plan with special education was as well.
Thank you.
So this is, I don't know, this is Dr. Baddick. Hi, Vivian, how are you?
I'm good, Dr. Baddick. Thank you so much. And thank you for continuing to answer all my emails.
Oh, you're quite welcome, anytime. As I did state to you, I will certainly keep your concerns in mind. And when this is all over, God willing, I will absolutely meet with you as a member of the IEP team. We will address your concerns, as we will have to do with all of our students who have special needs. And at that time, we can make a decision. I know that your concerns are definitely justified, and we're going to have to look at things on a case-by-case basis. But I feel very comfortable in speaking for the district in saying that we want to ensure that all of our students have the skill set that they need to advance and succeed moving forward. But because there's so many things that are uncertain at this time, it's almost impossible for me to answer it entirely at this point in time. But absolutely, we will be taking everyone's considerations into everyone's concerns into consideration in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Baddick. Thank you, Vivian.
Thanks, Katie.
Sure.
Okay.
Katie, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry. I believe I have Arlene to thank for that. um, we do not have a personnel report, correct?
Correct. There was a miscommunication. I thought there was and there wasn't.
Thank you. Thank you. So with that, may I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
I'll make that motion.
Second?
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Dr. Finan, are we simply turning this over to you?
I think so. I just need to check with Mr. Dupree. Billy, do we just continue?
Yes, Dr. Finan, yes, I believe I scanned, and I believe many members of the advisory board are on
Okay.
this call. I know I saw Dr. Mayen. I saw many. I saw Larry West, so many of them are on. So I believe we should just continue.
Okay, thank you. My other question for Billy, I do think we had a 7 o'clock hard stop on this call. Do we need to modify that? Because we will not be finished by 7 o'clock.
I don't believe we need to.
Okay.
But I'll see if I can modify while it's going on.
Okay. Can you pull up the presentation?
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for staying on the call and being part of this presentation. I apologize for it starting so late. We had some technical difficulties in the beginning, but we are very thankful that you all are on the call now. For those of you who are new to the school board, this review is partly for you to understand where we are with the recovery plan, some of the accomplishments that we have achieved thus far. But like everything else we discussed earlier this evening, these are stressful times. And I acknowledge what Rosemary said right at the beginning. And for everyone, I want you to know that this is not, we are taking an approach in this presentation that we really want to preserve jobs, and we really want to provide the best programs we can afford to provide for our students, understanding the changes in the climate, both locally and nationally, and of course within our state. So what I'd like to do is begin with just talking about how we're going to deliver this presentation. Many of you have met the two gentlemen that I've been working with all year and who have been in the district prior to my arriving in the district. They're from the PFM Group Consulting. They are Dean Kaplan and Ian Tysone. They have been instrumental in working with me. I couldn't do this job without them, so I'm very thankful. We will all share in this presentation tonight. I will begin, and then they will follow through. Our goal here is for you to understand the current status of the recovery plan and to understand some of the recommendations. There will be a consideration at the end for you as the board to take forward to the April 6th meeting. So as I begin, please move to the next slide. The overview is here, and I will not read every word to you. This will be posted. It is it will be on our website for you to view, and certainly I'm always available. If you have a question, you can send me your email question and I will answer. For those of you who remember when we did the presentations late in July, we did adopt the recovery plan in August of 2019. The whole focus of that plan has been on implementing the plan initiatives and addressing other emerging challenges, including those that are just so current with us. There is an interrelated goal of improving academic performance and stabilizing finances, in order to balance things for the long term. Stable budgets are a key tool to invest the limited funds that we have in both the educational and operational priorities. As I mentioned so many times when I've spoken with you, that the challenges that we're facing now didn't just happen overnight. They happened a very long time ago, and it's going to take us many years of hard work to and prioritization to address every single issue. Continuing what we had done yesterday absolutely would not be the right situation to move to. We need to resolve some of the district challenges. It will require a new approach, and we need to focus on the limited financial and operational resources that we have to apply these resources over time for this structured plan. Many of the academic, financial, and operational challenges are related to one another. So a multifaceted plan is needed to address the root of each problem. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd begin with giving you an update on some of where we stand with some of the academic initiatives. We actually have been very busy. We have implemented a lot of changes. And so again, I'll just point out a few of these that are really important. We have restored some of the funding for curricular materials. We still aren't where we need to be, but we'll take some moving steps forward. We are in the process of implementing a 5-year computer replacement plan with increased funding for purchases, and I don't think that it's clear in our current situation that that is a major priority for moving forward. I'm very thankful for the work of Rosemary and the SFT. They worked with us right in the beginning to move our ER&D professional development to after school hours, and that was a promise that Rosemary gave to us. And in return, they do need a contract. So we do need to continue to move in these very difficult times to with a contract moving forward at some point. Some of the other ones you can see, we began dialogue with Johnson College to access some technical programs for our students and to expand some of our dual curriculum programs. We did receive a 21st Century grant, which provides STEM-based resources in grades 4 and 5 in all of our elementary buildings. That's been going beautifully. Thank goodness we did this. We did Google training on the Clever system and to a way to teach the teachers to access the online materials, and that was certainly foresight for what we're dealing with now. For the first time, and I've been told it's been 18 years since we had accurate report cards. I give a shout out to Paul and Julie Maloney and a number of people who worked on that initiative. I'm very thankful for that because we finally have accurate report cards. We did complete the transition to school-wide Title I programs, and that will allow us to use some of those title program monies in a very different way. We also began professional development for our differentiated instruction, professional learning communities, which are part of our ATSI plans. We also did complete a curriculum audit, and we are adding 2 AP courses for psychology and Spanish for the 2021 year. So I'm very pleased, and I thank all the administrators who worked very hard on that. Next slide, please. Under the area of special education, one of our huge initiatives was to begin a special ed audit. While we were on the board meeting, I received an email stating that that audit is done, and that will come to our hands in the next week or so. So I'm pleased with that. I'll be anxious to read that, and then hopefully we can begin implementation of some of those recommendations. We did adjust some job descriptions for our diagnosticians to help alleviate some of the backlog that we had and to really use their expertise in a different way. We did add a replacement supervisor to a position where someone had left for medical reasons, but we had difficulty replacing that person, and we were able to find one, and I congratulate Dr. Baddick for that. We also implemented a master teacher training program for special education teachers and paraprofessionals and began AIMSWED Plus training, and that's been very important. We have an ongoing exploration of how to improve our access, reimbursement services, and monies, and we did secure remote-based psychology services as finding school-based psychologists are very difficult in this environment. So I'm very pleased with some of those accomplishments. Under our administrative initiatives, we have updated a number of policies and are still in the process of doing that, made several recommendations, and as soon as we can move on those, we will. We did cease the using of non-disclosure agreements or reorganize the central office staff. We also implemented online IT help ticket process, and that's been very beneficial and has made us more efficient. And Missy did a wonderful job creating a data submission report with key timelines that would keep everybody on target for when their reports are due. Previously, the Scranton School District seemed to be always late with reports, and Missy has done a great job keeping us on target with the timeline. So thank you, Missy, for that. Under budget and finance, we did a number of initiatives. We adopted our first budget. Oh, sorry, next slide. Thank you. Adopted the first budget in several years that didn't rely on scoop debt financing. That's huge. Very happy with the work that everybody put into that, especially Pat. Completed final reconciliation of Plan Con documents. Some of these went back 18 years, folks. And so we finally completed those. I'm very happy about that. We moved to direct deposit for all employees, and I would hope that all employees now are very happy that we completed that process, because now it just ends up in their accounts. We prepared the RFQs for auditing and food service management services, and at the last meeting we did approve a new auditing firm for our school district. Above all, we implemented a transition to the use of CSIU accounting and management modules, including electronic purchase order system, AR billing for out-of-district students, rental of facilities, asset inventory, food service, capital project funds, and student activity funds. The ongoing training to the new fund accounting system and payroll software has been instrumental in helping us keep everything running smoothly, and Pat has done a great job with his office staff in completing that. And of course, as you know, we eliminated the double discount period and changed that collection date to coincide with the city, and we should all be very thankful because we did collect a number of taxes that probably we wouldn't have under if we had kept that double discount. So I'm very thankful for the work that Pat and his group has done on that, and thank you, board, for moving quickly on that, because I think it's really has benefited us. Under the facilities initiatives, I probably don't need, next slide, please. I probably don't need to remind you all the time and effort that has gone into some of the facilities and the facility issues that we've had. We have held a number of building advisory committee meetings. We've reviewed the capital priorities, and this is prior to the asbestos issue. We completed the building capacity analysis, and that really helped us move those 833 students very quickly because we had that done. We completed the inventory of vehicles that we have. We have identified dude solutions that we're going to use to improve our operations management system, and we're very pleased with that. Completed the sale of Lincoln Jackson School, and of course, you know about the water testing, and turned off some fountains and sinks, and we're continuing to mitigate that situation. So again, thank you. And our facilities continue to have a lot of needs, and you'll hear more about that later. Under the transportation initiatives, we continued the route optimization and began planning for the RFP issuance. We reorganized the transportation office personnel to assist the transportation manager, and we completed the implementation of the district's transportation management software. And there were a lot of hands in that to complete that, and I'm happy that Kathy Bevilacqua worked very hard to help us complete that. Next slide, please. Finally, what are the key challenges? The key challenges continue to be, we need to bring our academics up to 21st century standards. They're not there. We haven't ever had a lot of money to invest in updating curriculum, technology, classroom spaces that allow us to do current educational practices. A stable budget, stable central office staff will help lay that groundwork so we can get there. Every school building requires large investments to remain functioning. I think you're pretty well aware of that. We have a 2012 feasibility study and a 2018 review that was conducted by PFM that identified tens of millions of dollars in building repairs that are required to keep the buildings open. Subsequent review of those buildings and capital projects, we've since refined that list, but you also know we still have those major needs, and we just had a number of issues that we've had to address, and we have addressed those, but it doesn't improve our functioning for 21st century standards. The other challenge, budgets will require hard work to be balanced for the foreseeable future. Even after the changes that we made to the 2019 and 2020 budgets for closer alignment, financial projections in the recovery plan, and updated projections over the last several months, we still show multi-million-dollar deficits if no further action is taken. Addressing these deficits will require completing the recovery plans review and savings initiatives to avoid borrowing for operations. For many programmatic and operational investments, savings will need to be found within the budget. And I know those are hard words to hear, especially given our newest challenge. And we will have unexpected challenges that will continue to emerge. Those that have affected our health and safety issues in the buildings, asbestos, lead in the water, all of those, and now we have COVID-19. So over the course of the next several years, as the implementation of the plan continues, the district will likely continue to encounter challenges that were not in the original plan, and we'll have to face those challenges and find answers within our own means. I believe, Dean, you are up next. Next slide, please.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Candace. I appreciate it. Everyone, I'm very glad for your staying on. I know it's been a long session due to the technical issues, and I really appreciate it. I know a number of the board members who participated in the original plan, and those who weren't elected yet. Some of you came, so there are a couple of you I haven't met. So hopefully one day this will be over. We'll meet in person. But I did want to say, for starters, that my firm works with state and local governments and school districts around the country. And over the last 2 weeks, we've been on these kind of calls with scores of districts and governments. And I think sometimes we all have a feeling that we're a little bit out on our own island, and we're kind of fighting with this all by ourselves. But even though it's not really necessarily obvious to everyone, I've just seen a number of groups just like you making incredible efforts to kind of keep things together. You're working from home in all kinds of odd situations, and have your kids and grandkids and parents with you on your calls. And I just think it's a great testament to the great work we can do together. And I thank you as somebody who gets to see this everywhere for really the amount of time and effort you've put in on it, and all these issues. This report on the building reconfiguration strategy may seem a little bit off from the other things you've been doing, because we've been doing so many things that are based on what are we going to do tomorrow, what's going to happen. As noted on the earlier call, the governor changed the rules about 3 hours ago, and that's going to keep happening. At the same time, we still need to plan for the future, and I think Scranton School District has a great future. It's going to require some flexibility and some change, and maybe even more so given where we are. But the recovery plan requires the district to look at its academic programs and building usage and have a comprehensive facilities usage plan. That's what we've been working on for the last several months, looking at different grade configuration, transportation, what are the capital needs, how can we pay for them? And what we found in starting to do that was that it was so intertwined with other initiatives that we went back and talked to the district's academic leadership, to the superintendent and her senior staff, and said, before we start, thinking through the mirror, who goes in what classroom and what building, and understanding the strong, ties across the city to different buildings. What are we trying to achieve here academically? And in doing that, we realized that the building reconfiguration was very highly linked to the transition to community providers for pre-kindergarten, the transportation efficiencies, the special education audit, and other items in the plan that are in process or coming quickly. So you'll hear as we go through this, even though this is a building plan, we're really using the buildings to leverage the district's academic strategy and to move forward strongly in an academic way that still deals with the plan constraints on finances. In terms of doing this, as Candace noted, we have been meeting for several months, and I particularly wanted to call out the Building Advisory Committee. All of them volunteered their time, came to several meetings, went on tours of buildings, and really we learned a lot from them. It's not always obvious, but we were listening really carefully to what people said. Not every single thing could be put into this plan, but I think it really made a difference to have that community input, and a number of board members participated. Rosemary participated. That made a big difference to us. So going forward, what we're really trying to do here is to talk about what we found and what we suggest you do next. And even though these aren't the issue that's going to probably fall in our laps tomorrow or Wednesday, we do think we need to move forward on these fronts in order to be prepared for whatever happens next, and to meet the financial challenges we're facing. And I'll talk a little bit about that next, and could go to the next slide. Just briefly, for those of you who recall, when we did the original plan, district, that although we have a couple years here where the budget is balanced, if we don't do anything else, the budget will float out of balance eventually, and we'll have annual deficits that are significant, and new additional negative fund balance numbers that become quite significant in just a very few years. Next slide. However, with the recovery plan, we had a number of significant initiatives which got at the underlying finances and included different approaches to start bringing that into balance. It wasn't perfect, as we noted, even with changes that we've suggested in the plan and are required by the plan. The district will continue to face large annual deficits in the next several years. However, the budget is being slowly brought into balance, and particularly after the first several years starts to show some positive results. So, as Candace said, this problem didn't occur overnight. It's not going to be solved overnight, but we want to make real progress on the issues that save us money, because they're critical for investing in academic priorities, providing raises to teachers, and making sure that the buildings are safe for our students to be in. Next slide, please. Just again, as a recap, the situation is really quite serious. It's hard to tell from Pat's discussion of the cash flow, But the district is not sitting on giant bags of cash that it can put it into other issues. It really depends on the time of the year, when taxes come in, when state aid comes in. The district has had a going concern audit in its noted in its audit for 5 years. And frankly, although I've seen going concerns in several other places I've worked over my career in the public sector, I've never seen that 5 years in a row. And I think that that's a pretty serious red flag. The district borrowed to fill its deficit for several years in a row, and Candace noted that that was a major achievement of the board and the district in avoiding that for this year. That's a critical piece of what we need to do going forward. But the district does have almost $280 million in outstanding debt after the current year, and we'll be paying that off for a long time, including the borrowing that was necessary when state funding was delayed a bit a few years ago. So there are strong financial pressures on us, and we need to sort of stick with our path in order to negotiate our way out of that over time. Next slide, please. So just to I think I've hit most of these cases, but the key thing is that what we want to do in the end is not have to turn to Pat at the last minute and say, gee, do we have enough money to extend the deadline here or there? That's what a fund balance is for. It's to create working capital to pay bills and meet other obligations and have a reserve for contingencies like the one we're facing right now. The way the state looks at this, they would like you to have a fund balance of 8%, which would be about $13 million a year. In local governments, the number is frequently quite higher, more like about 2 months of expenses, which would be around almost $28 million a year. Right now the district has a negative unassigned fund balance of about $20 million a year. So we have a significant place to go to be in a place where you would have reserves to be able to operate like a normal school district on a normal basis. And of course we're facing some threats from COVID-19, which we'll discuss in a second. So that's sort of where we're coming from. Just give me the next slide, I believe. Just to speak a minute on that, because it came up in the context of some of your discussions in the last meeting. There are a lot of potential threats, and just to make it clear, we on this slide we included things that could happen, not things that necessarily will happen, and to just provide some context and things that we'll be watching over the next several months. Obviously, you've talked a bit about the real estate tax collection structure. There may be, as it was after the Great Recession, we could see some assessment appeals. We could see reduced taxes from other areas, which you discussed earlier. Right now, I think it's a little too early to tell what's going to happen with federal and state aid, especially given the CARES bill that Congress passed last week. We've made some preliminary inquiries to the state. I think they're still working through the details. But clearly, the timing and amount of state aid and other issues is something we're going to have to really focus on in the next several weeks, as well as what you discussed on the last call, need for distance learning and money to support that. I think the thing that we do know is that it's going to be much harder in the short term for Harrisburg to provide the additional new recurring formula aid that the district has been very clear that it would like from the state. I think that's, obviously that's something we would expect you to continue to ask for, but in the short term, it may be something that's harder for them to do, perhaps even than it was before. So with that, let me just move on to the next section, which is really focusing on what I was discussing in terms of the academic underpinning of what we're trying to do. Again, bringing academics to the fore, and then having the building strategy fit around that. I think that's Candace's.
Yes, thank you, Dean, very much. So let me tell you a little bit about the recommendations that we're going to make. Here's a preview. We're going to talk to you tonight about reprogramming of Title I funding from pre-kindergarten programs to K-5 math and reading support, while retaining pre-K in Scranton and preserving jobs for teachers and paraprofessionals. We're going to talk to you about establishing a middle school STEM program, and this stands for science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine. That program would begin in the middle school and expand to higher grades over time. Expanding the high school supports to promote readiness for higher education or the workforce. We found that as a deficit, and we want to focus on that. I'll talk to you about that. We are going to talk to you about investing in building repairs with a focus on health, safety, and deferred maintenance. And then we're going to talk to you about a reduction in the number of leased or owned school buildings to free up funds for the academic enhancements. Each of these I'll describe in later in this presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are our goals. Goal 1, improve performance in reading and mathematics for K-5 students. In the appendix of this, which we will not discuss tonight, it's also certainly something in our plan, you will see the test scores. If you recall them, our test scores in math and science are very poor. Our reading ELA is slightly better. What we want to do is transition the pre-kindergarten teachers and paraprofessionals to K-5 roles while creating new pre-kindergarten alternatives in Scranton, and use the funds for the 14 reading and math paraprofessionals and pre-K teachers for reading and math intervention positions. They would be reading specialists and or math coaches. Our goal is to provide exciting career prep programs for students beginning in the middle school, and that's where we'd like to launch a new STEM program for students in grades 7 and 8. And if you notice, our STEM has an extra M, which is the medicine. We thought connecting with the local universities that have a variety of medical programs in them, as well as the Geisinger Medical School, would be an excellent opportunity for us in our locality to integrate a STEM program. We did send some administrators to look at the one that I forget the district outside of Allentown has, and we are looking to write this summer a program that will start. It's a place to start, and we'll expand those offerings through grade 12 over time. I'd like to do some combinations with the local universities, and I don't know that it's a better time than now, given the current situation we have with COVID, to emphasize the need for biotechnical medical professionals. Our goal is to ensure high school students remain engaged and graduate with options for higher education or work. We have a very low graduation rate, if you recall from our plan, and so we want to partner with outside organizations to expand some offerings. We also would like to establish a mid-year graduation to support those students who are on track to complete grade 12 and move on to either higher ed or a technical school. Want to guarantee equitable access to learning opportunities for special education students, and we'd like to align those with the findings that we received from the special education audit. Like to provide educators with access to materials and training. We'd like to restore some curriculum purchases in the budget. We restored some of them. We'd like to continue that. We'd like to build on successful ERD collaboration with the teachers union and develop strategies for continuing the continuity of education plan for virtual learning. And however we have to grow that plan and change that, we'll work in concert with the teachers union for that. We need to maintain safe and healthy spaces for students to learn, and that will require issuing of bonds to complete the highest priority of building projects. So those are our goals. Those are our actions. Next slide, please. Aligning the budget with our goals. How are we going to do this? Well, we're going to have to continue to do good financial planning. School districts don't just exist to collect taxes and pay bills, but the money is really critical. We have to have money to continue our district mission. Without that, we can't do anything. There are a number of ways that tight budgets and financial issues impact learning, as you know. If we don't have a stable staffing levels, then we always will have disruptions to our classroom and the educational program. We will have to reduce student support services if we don't have financial good financial monies to do that. We have a limited ability to generate funds to support salary increases in training, and deferment of building repairs, reliance on old or outdated curriculum, classroom materials, and technology just are things that impact learning. And when I first arrived in the district, the first textbook I picked up was a U.S. history textbook, and the date on it, the copyright date was 1984. I was appalled. I said, we can't be teaching U.S. history out of a 1984 textbook when it's 2019 at the time. So we need to make a number of changes. And with that, we need to go back to our plan to help build those resources for it. We also have had a number of initiatives to request more and more money from the state, but we can't wait and hope that that windfall will come our way. We have to find the money within our budget to achieve our priorities. We are going to have to make priorities, and we're going to have to prioritize the best of the decisions, maybe the best of the worst of the decisions, but we're going to have to find the monies within our own budget because it's not coming to us, and it's probably never been more evident than what's happened in the last couple of weeks. New slide, please. So we have some guiding principles to consider, and I will just highlight those. They're in blue. You can read these. The board needs to consider these principles. Number one, Scranton cannot do everything, but we must do something. We own or rent 18 school buildings. Many were built before the Second World War. Some of them haven't been touched in over 50 years, as you know. Making these buildings warm, safe, dry, and compliant with modern requirements will cost tens of millions of dollars, bringing them up to modern teaching standards. It requires significantly more money. New school buildings are just not an immediate possibility. We must plan to use the buildings that we have for the time being while beginning to plan and save for new buildings in the future. Number two, Scranton has to prioritize its plans. Both rehabilitation of the district's current buildings and construction of new properties will be extremely expensive. The district's significant financial challenges will compound these difficult decisions, and the district will have to choose among the best and most achievable options rather than waiting for a perfect solution. These decisions will need to be balanced against all the other priorities and emerging issues. Number three, even changes for the good will be disruptive. However, adults should make choices that are least disruptive for students. Rehabilitating our existing buildings and in the future replacing old buildings with new buildings will take time and will cause temporary closures or reassignments. However, these changes are for long-term investment in our students, so our adults will have to compromise first. And I think that's been shown in the last couple months that we're able to do that. Next slide, please. Number four, the guiding principle, Scranton should operate fewer, more efficient buildings. Limited resources means the district will have to prioritize the funds it invests into its buildings. Changes to buildings will take into account other preferences, such as desire for walkable elementary schools. We heard that loudly and clearly in our building and in our advisory committee meetings. And they want equitable programs at each of those walkable schools. We heard that. In all cases, the district should seek to have fewer buildings, with the most expensive buildings to renovate having priority for closure where possible. The fifth guiding principle is Scranton should not fund all of the cost of new construction and major rehabilitation from debt. We're already, as you could see, $280 million in debt. Whenever possible, we need to try to fund all or some of the capital improvements try not to fund it from debt, but we need to look for other opportunities to fund those. Sometimes we have money from PlanCon reimbursement in our capital projects funds, and we can use some of that to help allay some of the costs for capital improvements. We need to set aside money so we can do pay-as-you-go funds for projects that are otherwise ineligible for other debt. We have to be really conscious of not digging the hole deeper in Scranton for our debt. Pre-kindergarten programs are an important asset of the city, and the district's transition will not reduce those opportunities for students. I really want everyone to pay very close attention. I know this is a hot issue, it's a hot topic, it's an emotional issue, but I need everyone to understand what the recommendation is. In the current configuration, pre-kindergarten programs are in 14 classrooms across the district's 11 elementary school buildings. These programs will continue in other forms because alternative sources of funding are available for pre-kindergarten, and there are providers who currently offer these services and could expand their programs. Scranton will continue to have pre-kindergarten programs. However, these will not be operated or paid for by the local school district. Current pre-kindergarten teachers and paraprofessionals are greatly needed to enhance the K-5 student learning and performance to meet state educational benchmarks. Next slide, please. Ian is now going to review the pre-kindergarten programs and options.
Thanks, Candace. And we can move on to the next slide. Here we go. So I just wanted to start off and talk about how as we mentioned earlier, this was an initiative that was included in the recovery plan. That said, we recognize that early childhood education is a very important part of learning. And the goal was never to remove the service without meeting the needs of the city's most vulnerable families. So this is a little preview of some of the work that we've done, looking at the landscape of the different providers that are in the city, and then also some of the differences in the services that the district currently provides and what's out there in terms of some of the other programs. The two major, well, when I get into this a little bit later, we'll talk about where the money comes from, but essentially there's three major sources of funding for pre-kindergarten programs outside of the district, that being Head Start, the state's pre-K counts programs, and tuition that comes from private and nonprofit providers. So transitioning services from the district's current format, where Title I funds are used to provide the services, to particularly Head Start and pre-K counts, brings more funds into the city to provide these programs at a time when the district has many more needs than the available funds are to run the different services that we have. I think more importantly, some of them, such as Head Start, actually bring more services to the students that the district would be unable to provide with the current financial situation. So as a little preview of the timeline that we're considering here for recommendation for the board, what we're recommending is that the district takes this in a phased approach over time. So that being for the next academic year, the current 3-year-olds would transition to the 4-year-old program. So the spaces for those students would be offered for them in the program for next year. The district would no longer accept applications for the 3-year-old program next year. However, the district will work with the community partners to make sure that there's space for those students in slots that are funded by Head Start, pre-K counts, and other ways. And then finally, in the next school year, so 2 school years from now, the district would no longer offer any pre-kindergarten programs, and all the services would fully transfer over to those providers. Next slide, please. So here's a breakdown of the program as it currently stands in the district. So as of February, we have the enrollment by different age group, by different part of the city. And it's not here on the slide, but in your mind, you could keep, in the back of your mind, you can keep that about 1/3 of the current students are in the current 3-year-old program, and about 2/3 of those are in the 4-year-old program. So currently, as Dr. Finan said, 14 classrooms in 11 elementary schools. The school program for pre-kindergarten operates on an AM and PM schedule. So not all classrooms are 3-year-old, not all classrooms are 4-year-old. That alternates depending on building and time of day. Each of those classrooms is staffed by a teacher and paraprofessional. And I think, as we mentioned earlier, this plan is presented to preserve those jobs, not in their current format for the pre-kindergarten program, but for some of the other important academic needs that we've identified. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, the way that we approached this was looking at the different funding streams for pre-kindergarten services. So major ones here that we're considering are Head Start, which is a federal program, Pre-K Counts, which is a state program, and then other programs that are mostly serviced by tuition, and some other ones that we'll get into a little bit later. Most of these early childhood education providers, other than school districts, can receive a certification through the Keystone Stars program. This is from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania through the Office of Childhood Development and Early Learning. And essentially this evaluates providers based on compliance with health and safety regulations, and also additional performance criteria. So here in the city of Scranton, we have the different the number of programs that are funded by these various sources, as well as a summary of the different rating levels. So 1 being complies with the basic requirements, and 4 being meets all the criteria. Next slide, please. So here we have an overview of some of the different funding streams. As I talked about earlier, Head Start and Pre-K Counts are the major ones in the state of in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Slots funded through Head Start and Pre-K Counts are free to the families who meet that eligibility criteria. The important differentiator between Head Start and Pre-K Counts is that Head Start has additional services for access to health, social service, and family engagement supports, where Pre-K Counts does not have those additional services. There are also some other funding streams. States can choose to provide a Head Start supplemental. There's also what's called Child Care Works, and then early intervention for special needs students. Next slide, please. This slide just compares the different elements of pre-K programs for as they are currently provided by the district, Head Start program, and then pre-K counts. So I just want to cover a couple of the ones on the left-hand side for Scranton School District. So even though here it says 1 teacher and 1 instructional aide per 20 students, that's not the case in every single classroom. That's going to vary depending on whether there's AM or PM. But in general, you can keep in your mind that the 3-year-old classes, they're generally smaller than that 20 student amount, and on average the 4-year-old classrooms are a little bit closer to that amount. Next slide, please. So we looked at income verification income verification information that was submitted to the city of Scranton, to the Scranton School District, and sort of compared those to the income eligibility requirements of both Head Start and Pre-K counts. So these are based on the federal poverty guidelines. They're updated each year, so over time these would change, but this is as of February 2020. So of those students, of those 133 3-year-old students, 87% would qualify for Head Start or Pre-K counts. That would be the 2 blue chunks of this pie chart. And the way that you can think about it is that Head Start begins servicing the students who are at the lower end of that spectrum. So as many students who meet those lower poverty threshold requirements, Head Start must serve them. And if there are additional slots above that amount, then Head Start can start to expand that range upward to serve more students. The broadest range is covered by Pre-K counts, which can up that range up to 300% of the federal poverty limit. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned earlier, this recommendation is to continue to provide services with the current teachers and paraprofessionals who are in the pre-kindergarten program, but through different means. So through this transition, early childhood education will continue in the city of Scranton. However, the funding, the location, and the providers will shift. In some of these cases, students who are moving to the Head Start program will receive an additional level of services other than what the district could provide on its own today. The students that we have many needs, and we need to service them in different ways, and Title I funds can be used or plan to be used to provide additional supports to the K-5 students, that we can increase the amount of time that we have for interventions, particularly for math, but also for reading if that's also found to be a need. And adding these funds to the schools would allow us to provide to move those 14 or 28 staff, 14 teachers, 14 paraprofessionals to the 11 elementary schools, so they would continue to work in those buildings. But the allocation of those positions would vary depending on that Title I budgeting process. Next slide.
Great.
I think this is Dean.
Yep. So let me make sure my mute's off. Good. So the next slide, please, after that one. Yeah, there we go. That's the one. When we were looking at all these issues of sort of balancing the building needs and the program needs, we met with the senior leadership team, and I really have to give a lot of credit to Missy and Paul and Ann and Pat in particular for the really creative thinking they put into this, because we really challenged them to say, you're the educators, you know what's needed, you know what shortfalls and shortcomings were identified in the plan. What do you think we can do in the midst of this building reconfiguration and because of it to really make exciting things happen? Next slide, please. Well, we sort of, as I said at the outset, we realized that all these things were interrelated. We were going to have to be flexible. It was going to have to evolve over time. But the key thing was to rethink how we were providing education, what class assignments were, what buildings were for, and then at the same time, as the plan mandates, move to a smaller number of buildings over time. While still meeting the state and federal education and safety requirements we have. And obviously that's really come to the fore in the last several months, realizing the challenges of the lead in drinking water and asbestos in the buildings. We really know what kind of problems we have on our hands and what we have to do. At the same time, nothing is perfect. So doing this is going to require ongoing dialogue with the community and making sure that we can kind of make these changes in a way that's most effective and works best for all the parents and students, teachers and staff. Next slide, please. So component one of our strategy was to say that Scranton can't afford to maintain all of its buildings right now. And Ian will go into this a little bit more detail in a minute, but with the outstanding debt load we have, we can't take on huge amounts of new additional debt to rebuild all of our buildings in the way we would ideally want to. We do, and we incorporated in the plan some additional borrowing to make sure we could update buildings. And I think one of the things we heard from the building reconfiguration committee was to include in future years, after we make our initial changes, some plans to have some targeted new facilities that will allow us to be a little bit more flexible and allow us to think creatively about what we do with our assignments in geography and try to kind of limit transportation if we can. But the fundamental underlying issues were, with fewer buildings, we could have fewer, fuller classrooms that would more equitably distribute all of the instructional resources. If we are able to close several buildings and eventually in the very long run construct a few buildings, we would be able to sort of get a more ideal structure and state. But that the construction will have to wait a little while, because we absolutely must spend money, as Ian will describe, on making the existing buildings safe and compliant. We have over $150 million worth of needs in those buildings and very little funding to meet them. So it's going to be a little bit of an iterative process over time. So our proposal is to keep the building configuration for next year beyond the pre-K change that we mentioned. But future years, we would look at changes that would range from reallocation of catchment areas to building closures and other reassignments to get to a more optimal structure that we can afford and that will ultimately allow us to free up some money to build newer places. Next slide, please. So in thinking about how to get there, the first piece was really, I thought, really exciting. It was an opportunity, in drafting the plan and presenting it and working with all of you. I think the real frustration we all felt was that because there were so few sources of new money, it was difficult to put more money back into the classroom right now. That we felt, I think, continually stymied with that. In looking at the K-5 initiative, by making the pre-K transition that Ian described, we can continue to serve all those kids, keep teachers in their jobs, get money into the city, which right now we're just passing by. We're not picking up. It's on the ground. We could get it. We're not getting it from the state and the feds. And it also makes more classroom space available. So in the long run, we can consolidate buildings and operate more efficiently and don't have to spend money on buildings we can't afford. But the academic issues that particularly Missy and Ann indicated were really the most exciting. And I think that having more supports in math and reading comprehension in K-5 with more time between staff and students is really a great opportunity to reverse the the academic shortfalls that we noted in the original plan. So this is sort of a unique opportunity to pick up cash that we didn't have otherwise and to apply it to an important problem the district faces. We know that we'll also, once we see and review the special education audit, we'll have some issues to deal with there. And we will need to focus, on different ways that we can do this most efficiently, and that we'll have to, as noted really early on, the least impact on the kids, and make it as effective as possible. Next slide, please. So that's our elementary thinking about what to do with the K-5 area to sort of kind of help push up scores there and improve our ability to serve kids. When we talked about the intermediate schools, I can't tell you how excited the senior leadership team was about the idea of having a STEM school. The best operated school districts in the country have a STEM program. We should have one because Scranton has to be one of the best operated school districts in the country and a place where kids really want to go. As Candace mentioned, they've already visited Parkland and some other programs that are looking at how they work and what aspects can be moved to Scranton. And the idea is that once we begin freeing up classroom space, we would be able to set aside a STEM academy that would start with 6th graders and possibly some 7th and 8th graders in not this school year, but the following fall. It'll take us that long to identify the space, get it ready, and to identify what children would like to be in the program to put together a really top-notch program. It's likely that, given just the way this district space works, that would be either at West Scranton High School or intermediate school, depending on how some of the other capital issues go. And again, the opportunity to use some of the unused space at West Scranton for this program would both create a pathway for kids who want to stay in that program through high school. We can keep it at West Scranton and add a grade every year. And it would also free up some classroom space in the intermediate schools, which would allow us to operate more efficiently on the intermediate school side. And we'll see. We think that that's probably doable, but we know when we open the wall or repair the roof, we might find some things that'll change our plans. In the meantime, we're applying for a grant to help start up the program and try to make it real. The final, next slide, please. I'm sorry. And then at the high school level, as we noted earlier, the issues there are sort of twofold. There are a lot of kids who want to graduate early, who need flexible course requirements, who aren't quite sure how to navigate that process, would like to have some opportunities for better technical education and to be more career ready. And we think that's an issue of real focus for the district that really they can be very successful with. As Candace said, with Johnson Technical College and Lackawanna College and the CTC, you've got really great opportunities for students. And it's a matter of more effectively matching them up together so that we can make sure that a kid who's largely done at in the middle of the year can spend the rest of the year doing their career in technical education, that somebody who needs a credit or two for graduation is getting really focused support from the administration and staff to make sure they get that credit one way or another, in this way or in a different way, to make sure that they graduate. So for those kids, it's one focus, and then on the other side, I know that we've all been very concerned for a long time with the district's college attainment rate. There are kids who want to go to college who need to know that they can get there, and there needs to be support for them. And we think that there are ways to help more kids take the SAT, be college ready, and be able to go, perhaps who right now don't see the supports or have the knowledge that they could really do it. So those are the academic backdrops of what we're trying to do. And next, Ian's going to summarize the approach to the buildings, which would allow us to get there.
Thanks, Dean. We can move on to the next slide. So the district currently has 20 different facilities, 16 school buildings that you own, 2 academic spaces that you rent, with your annex in the Electric City Academy, the administration building, and Memorial Stadium. Every one of these places will require some sort of investment over the next 1, 2, 5, 7 years. And many of those are going to be in the tens of millions of dollars for individual school buildings. Among some of the newer ones, Scranton High School and Isaac Tripp Elementary School, even though these were built 10, 20 years ago, we're now at the point in their life cycle where they need significant maintenance just to continue to operate. Some of the older buildings, they require many high-cost renovations like new roofs, new HVAC systems, and these are necessary to keep the doors open. We need to make sure that leaks are not preventing the closure of classrooms or portions of the building, or causing damage to changes that we're making on the inside. So we can't repair a bathroom and then have the roof leak and destroy the bathroom. These projects, they're not going to draw flashy headlines, but they're needed. They're also very expensive. Next slide, please. So here's a summary of what we've found to be the capital needs based on the information that we have so far. So all the way on the right-hand side, the 3 rightmost columns, these are the costs that we could identify based on what we have in front of us today. So the short-term needs are the ones that we think that we need to do right away if we want to keep those doors open for the next couple of years. Most of those come from the district's 2012 feasibility study, some high priority needs that we found in 2018, and then some new ones for a revised review that we completed over the past couple of months. These are projects like completing fixing roofs, fixing the HVAC system, and also making some investments in ADA accessibility, general repairs for outside and inside of the buildings, fences, walls, doors, roofs, things like that. Next slide, please. So as we talked about earlier, the plan to finance these would be to issue bonds to cover the costs of the most highest priority capital projects. So previous slide, we looked at best estimates of about $110 million. This is based on what we know today. This could be different if at the bottom of the slide here, we know that those pieces of information that we have are out of date. So as part of this recommendation, in addition to doing those highest priority projects, we're also saying that we need to go back and update that study so that we know exactly what the district needs over the next several years, because a lot's changed between today and 2012. The cost of completing these projects are completely different. The district's needs are completely different. And some of the buildings that were not an issue almost 10 years ago, now we're seeing many $1 million costs for projects that are in many millions of dollars. Savings that come from the building realignment and closure, they will be used to reduce the costs of that borrowing. So even if we were able to borrow for half of that amount, we still have to make up, we still have to cover the whole $110 million over time. So operating fewer buildings lets us cover more of those high priority projects over time. If there are any additional programs for that will extend those capital dollars, so any support from the state or federal government, we can use those to do more things or to reduce the cost on the budget, whatever we might need at that given time. Next, before we move on to the next slide, The district also needs internal capacity to handle these projects. So the middle two bullets of this slide are also part of our recommendation, that the district find temporary help to oversee these projects in terms of the day-to-day management, managing the timeline of the bids, and then most importantly of all, inspecting the work completed on behalf of the district. Next slide, please. Over the long term, this will change, but for now we can say for the immediate year coming up, all the buildings that we have open today will remain open based on the information that we have right now. However, in future years, we cannot guarantee that every single one of those buildings will be open. So at the end of the 5 years, the plan that we're considering or that we're proposing for consideration includes the following. So we know, based on our review of capacity, there is space at the elementary level for consolidation. So this would include closure of 1 to 2 elementary schools. And although it doesn't say here, this could also include the creation of a new elementary school as part of that, if the district's finances are able to handle that. We also know at the intermediate level that we need to address needs. Some of the highest cost buildings are the intermediate schools. We know that we can't fix all the problems in every one of them, so we need to come up with a long-term plan for that. So for now, that's including occupying a portion of North and Northeast Intermediate, and then over time, not next year, but over time, eventual replacement of Northeast with newer building or multiple buildings at multiple sites, and also working the location and impact of the STEM program on that configuration. Again, at the bottom, the sale of the administration building. So this would include the sale of that building, dedicating those funds to the district's capital needs, and then moving administration personnel to other locations. And then finally, as part of this, finding a way to reduce the district's reliance on rented space, because those 2 buildings, the Whittier Annex and the Electric City Academy, they do take up a portion of your budget. So savings that we could find there could be dedicated to other priorities. Next slide, please. And we know that this will change over time. So as we mentioned earlier, so if the financial outlook improves, or if we find that the costs of repairs are greater than what we're able to take on today, maybe new schools become a consideration. But for now, we know just to keep the buildings that we have open, we need to invest significant dollars now. So that would be a longer term item to consider. There's going to be multiple criteria used to evaluate which buildings would be the subject of closure. And here we're talking about looking at opportunities for academic improvement, the size of the building, how many classrooms can you fit in there, the cost of improving the building, impact on walkability, what the community needs, and also access to programs. Next slide. And Candace, I think this is back to you.
Thank you very much. So what are our next steps? You heard us talk about pre-K. Just for those new board members who maybe not understand, the mission in public schools in Pennsylvania is K through 12. Why do we have pre-K? Well, I think we've heard that it's been in operation for over 54 years. That's admirable that Scranton School District started it a long time ago. 54 years ago, I can guarantee that Head Start and pre-K counts were not part of the landscape at that time. So why are we looking at it? Because you do not receive any dollars from the state for those 404 students that we have in pre-K. We are funded from the students who are in our classrooms from kindergarten through 12th grade. The money that we are using for pre-K, as you all know, is money that we've set aside from Title I. And as you saw on a previous slide, that's $2.3 million. We do have educational needs for our kindergarten through 5th grade students in the area, some of the basic educational areas of math and reading, English language arts. So that is why we're talking about now asking you to consider what we're talking about here. Our next step is to give parents, children, and the nonprofit and private providers time to plan for the fall of 2020. The board should vote to approve the pre-kindergarten transition plan at its April 6th meeting and include the new allocation of funds in the 2021 state and federal Title I planning documents. Those documents would be written during the summer, June, July of this 2020. So we would have to have that transition plan to, and I'll just repeat it, grandfather in the 3-year-old pre-K students, they would move to the pre-K 4-year-old program. We would not admit new 3-year-olds to the program. We would work in concert to help parents find the appropriate pre-K program to meet their needs. In that pie chart that Ian described, based on the current dollars that we know parents make in our area, we would know that only 17 children from that pre-K 3 class wouldn't receive free pre-kindergarten program. So we felt pretty good about that. They would have access to longer programs with wraparound services. Some of the programs offer a lot of emotional, social support programs for both families as well as children. So our next step is to ask you as a board at your April 6th meeting to vote to approve the transition to just a pre-K 3 program. Those teachers are not going to lose their jobs. We are going to use those existing pre-K teachers in our K-5 program to assist in the areas of as math coaches, as reading language arts coaches, specialists. One pre-K teacher is a reading specialist. They also have the opportunity to bid into a classroom. If they have the right years and experience, they can also bid into an elementary classroom because they are all elementary certified teachers. That's next step 1. Next step 2, to meet the critical capital needs, we are already in the process of hiring a director of facilities, grounds, and operations. And of course, that's in process right now. We are identifying the most critical capital needs by prioritizing the capital projects and including them in a capital budget that we will present to you, the school board. When we have a capital project that we need to do, we will need to look for, I would call it a project manager, who would be hired just to oversee that project. And it wouldn't be an additional employee. They would just be a contractor that we would hire for a specific job period of time. We would designate projects that can be designated and executed in the summer of 2020, if any, at this point. Right now, I think we have to wait to see what happens with COVID-19. We would also look at what projects can be designated and executed during the 2021 school year, including school breaks, and of course, the summer of 2021. I applaud what we have been able to do in a very brief period of time. Certainly last summer, when we were faced with an elementary school that was full of mold, in a period of about 2 weeks, Paul and the resources in the maintenance department and through the leadership of the administrative team, we were able to get that building ready, carpet pulled out, things changed, and ready for the start of that school year. So we can do projects. We do have a number of resources to do that. We just need the finances ready for that. And depending on the need for emergency repairs and the balance in the capital fund, we need to prepare for debt borrowing either in the fall of 2020 or early of 2021. to fund the initial round of projects. And those are the projects that we're talking about, the ones that are most needy, the ones that where we need a roof. We have to put roofs on buildings so we have less mold and less leaking. And then, of course, we can repair the walls that were damaged and replace the flooring that was damaged. And we have some buildings where there's duct tape over the carpet because the holes are so large, and we just haven't had the ability to replace some of that. We need to do that. So those are our next steps. Next slide, please. And at this end, I will tell you beyond that, we have, if you could go to the next slide, please. There's an appendix, and in that appendix, we have the fundamental plan initiatives that you can read. Next slide, please. We've captured the elementary test scores from the recovery plan that you can look at, and you can see the needs are clearly there. If you don't want to look at Abington Heights because you don't think that's a great comparison, just look at the statewide average. We need to be at or above that statewide average. And when I look at, let me just point out grade 3 in math, Scranton is at 39.2 and the statewide average is at 54.1. We have a long way to go. Next slide, please. We have in our plan a number of estimated construction costs. I know in the last couple of weeks with some of the challenges we've had at Northeast Intermediate, some of you have asked me what the cost of an elementary school would be, what the cost of an intermediate school would be. And these are, of course, estimates, but you can see what they are, and so much depends on the size of the building that we're talking about. And I think that's the last slide. Yes. I'd like to thank Dean and Ian and everyone who listened to our presentation. I know we are much longer than we expected at this time of the evening, but we are willing to take questions.
Hi, this is Gus. I was wondering if I could ask a couple of questions. So starting with the pre-K, have you been talking with SLHDA? Can they expand capacity to take on, say 7 or 8 new Head Start classrooms?
Do you want to take that, Ian? Or we have been talking to them, yes.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Been talking. Okay, the short answer is yes. And we do know that transitioning just moving the 3-year-old program to the 4-year-old program, just working with one group of 3-year-olds, we know that there is capacity among the various providers.
So they wouldn't have to open up new buildings?
I can't answer that piece of it, Mr. Fay. I can't. Does anybody have that answer? I know, Ann, you've been working with them. Ian, you have. I don't know about needing
this
to
is Dean.
open up a new building.
I think the providers have been aware that this is a possibility for a while. One of the reasons we suggested the phased approach was to make it easily, that they could more easily accommodate it, but we don't know the details of each of their plans of how they would do that. That
so
would be
you want to.
One reason we wanted to do this, now was to allow them to have that run-up time. Sorry.
This is Director McAndrew. So you want us to vote on this next week without knowing if they're able to do it or not?
Well, we do know that they're able to do it, but what we don't know is if they have to. His question was, do they have to open a new building? We don't have that answer about opening a new building. We do know that there's capacity out there among the providers for 3-year-old programs. We do know that.
And what about 3- and 4-year-old programs after that?
Well, our discussions with the providers and our understanding of their interest in this, and there is interest in the provider community, is that they would be able to accommodate the existing pre-K population with that phase-in approach.
I also want to make a note on when we've been looking at estimates for repairs to schools. What I remember last is that immediate repairs up till 7 years was going to cost us something like $53 million. And now I see like some of your estimates for, say, Neil Armstrong. We thought maybe there was $3 million worth of short and immediate repairs there, and now it's 6. So that's risen significantly since we last got together, and I was wondering if you could just comment on that.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. It actually goes back to Candace's point about the remediation and Neil Armstrong. So part of the need for the remediation there was due to humidity issues from the HVAC system. So one of the highest priority needs that we have is we know that we need to replace that entire system for Neil Armstrong Elementary. So that's probably the biggest driver of that cost there. I think somewhere in the range of $2-ish million, based on an estimate that we have on a per square foot basis. So this would need to be scope, size, and costed by an engineer figuring out what that is. But we know that this is a school-wide issue. Some of the other ones that came up in the past couple of months since the last time we met. So at Scranton High School, we know that there's issues going on with the fire, the sprinkler system. We don't know if those costs are a couple $100,000, could be multiple millions of dollars. There's high cost issues at that building too for the windows that we're a little bit unsure of. So a lot of those high cost needs have come out in the past couple of months of looking at what do we really need to do over the next couple of years to keep these buildings open.
So one of the reasons we suggested redoing the facilities study is that we are dealing with kind of a little bit of an amorphous thing here. Each time we turn to a new building, we find more. So I think you're right, Mr. Fahey, about the amount of funding that's available in the plan. We assumed that there would be about $50 to $55 million in borrowing, and that would be our first chunk of funding. And I think the real key issue here is to prioritize the buildings we want to be in and the projects in those buildings. So that we can essentially do a triage process and work through it over time. Good question.
Okay. And then my final sort of question, comment, Dean, I just wanted to sort of emphasize your thought about ongoing dialogue needed, because if we're looking at sort of reducing the population of Northeast in significant ways, I think the feeling among the parents there is that there hasn't really been sufficient process for getting their views on how to manage those kinds of situations. And so I think we really do need to improve the way that we have our conversations with our core constituencies. And I think we have to think harder about how we do that.
I think that's a really good point. And also, I think if we think about it sort of in a long-term basis, I think what we really heard coming out of this was that, there is a real demand for some sort of intermediate school services in that part of Scranton. So if we're in a position where, Northeast is our most expensive building, and it's probably pretty high on the list of buildings we should get out of, how do we over time, maybe it's not right away, but over time, how do we meet that demand from those parents, which is, really legitimate, to have a school in that area so that in the longer run, their kids have opportunity to be closer to home.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Great questions.
Dr. Fine, go ahead.
Sorry, Larry. Dr. Fine, to speak to Mr. McAndrew's point, do you think it would be possible to hear from any of these other providers that you've been working with who might offer these services to our pre-K students? I mean, could we reach out to them and ask if they would be willing to join us next, to perhaps tell us a little bit about what they think this program is going to look like going forward?
Certainly. And I know, I don't know if Anne wants to add anything. Anne Griebeck has had several meetings with them. She might want to add something, but we certainly can ask them for that. I do know that, and I'll give you one example with Head Start. Head Start, if does have money, if they were to buy a building, to renovate a building, they get their money from different sources, of course, than public ed does. So they were talking about looking for buildings that they could renovate and utilize, not just for the population we're talking about, but for other populations and other needs, such as the wraparound services. But Anne, if you're still on, do you want to add anything to that comment?
Thank you. And you're correct, Doctor. The different agencies in the area are eager and excited about increasing their enrollment, and they do have a lot of options and opportunities that they offer and provide. And I will be happy to reach out to them and invite them to speak at an upcoming meeting. That would not be a problem at all. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that good? On the 6th?
Yes, please.
We will reach out tomorrow.
Thank you. No worries. I'll take care of it.
If I could ask a question or offer a thought on the pre-K program. This is Mike Mahan. I'm on the advisory committee. I'm superintendent at Abington Heights. And the pre-K program, I think, is one of the best programs, one of the most distinguishing programs offered by the Scranton School District. I think it really does differentiate the district from its peers, and that differentiation needs to take place because of the great at-need population that exists in the city. So as far as just thinking about what I've heard tonight from PFM, first, I've not heard any feedback from district administration, principals about the efficacy of the program and the value that they believe it delivers. I would say that there are a particular synergy that could exist when a pre-K student attends pre-K in a building that their older siblings also attend. And the idea that they would be perhaps the younger siblings separated from their older siblings for a family that may not drive or have a car or have transportation could be a very serious issue. And again, I don't have the numbers or the other information here, only know what I've been seeing tonight. But I would say that for an informed decision to be made, there really has to be more justification than has been provided tonight. For example, I think if I'm a family living in the John Adams catchment area or the McNichols Plaza catchment area, that perhaps I should be told what happens with my kid in 2 years or 3 years from now. Because I certainly know good faith efforts have been going on to reach out to organizations to say, are you interested? Could you do it? And again, all these agencies are certainly interested right now, but there's a difference in my view between an interest and a commitment and a plan. And because we're talking about such a core, critically important service provided to the most at-risk population, perhaps in Northeastern Pennsylvania, I would just simply suggest that PFM has a very high standard to meet to justify eliminating what we all believe to be, or at least we suspect from the administrators and the people who are involved with it, a program that offers just an amazing service to a very high needs population. So I thank you for the opportunity to present, and I wish everyone the best. Thank you.
This is Rosemary Boland. I'm also on the recovery team, and I am obviously I'm the teacher union president here in the Scranton City School District. I appreciate all your comments, Doctor, and for the whole team. I'm going to throw a monkey wrench into this operation right now, because I did hear people say it's a question of bidding and nobody will lose jobs. I can assure you people will lose jobs. And right now, since it's already April, let's say, in order for the district to close pre-K 3-year-olds, the teachers who teach those programs cannot be reassigned by contract. So what has to happen is every one of those buildings is an elementary school, which throws all elementary buildings into the pot. And all teachers would have to rebid their jobs in the Scranton School District elementary schools, because those pre-K teachers have seniority rights, and most of them are at the top of the seniority chain. I don't think you have enough time to follow the contractual obligations that the Scranton School District signed with the Scranton Federation of Teachers to make this happen. That's just contractual. We are standing in opposition to closing pre-K for all of the reasons Dr. Mahan just spoke to, but also because we've lived it and we understand the student population here probably better than anybody, because we work with these families, we understand them. And I think to suppose that anybody can do the job as well as we do it, that's a fallacy. I'm speaking, obviously, I'm biased, but I know what goes on in our schools and I know what these teachers do with these young children. And to say that that can be matched by any outside agency, I think is malarkey. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, I would ask a question for the recovery team and PFM and in yourself. Do you find, like in your studies, did you find the preschool program to be successful, the one that we currently have?
Well, I will say, when I look at the test scores in I'm talking about math and ELA, and they're significantly lower than districts with the same type of poverty ratio. I don't know how I can say that that has a contributing factor. Pre-K has contributed to improved test scores. I certainly understand the importance of pre-K. I am the first to say it is important. And currently in a district, in every district, pre-K is an important educational environment for children of that age. Because of the financial condition that the district is in, and because of the very poor academic achievement at the elementary level, shifting the funds, title funds, to be supplemental to help the children in K-5 seems like a logical use of those funds when there are other resources to provide pre-K programs. I am not going to evaluate anybody else's pre-K program. I haven't gone in to evaluate them. I don't have that evaluation tool. But I will tell you that Keystone Stars is an indicator of the high standards that programs have. And when I look at 3 stars, 4 stars, that does indicate that they are high quality programs. Again, I'm back to where we started in the beginning tonight. We started with the need to make choices. It's not an easy decision. It's not easy to say, this is a better choice and that's a better choice. Everybody understands how important it is to get children into school. We also saw on that chart, if you look at that chart, that there are a number of full day programs available that I would argue a full day program is certainly more advantageous than a half day program. What I am saying, when you are not getting subsidy for those children, why do you think a number of schools don't run a pre-K program? They can't afford it. And so when you look at needing to look at where we spend our money and our resources, and we talked about classrooms, availability of space, I think it's part of that whole consideration. I would never tell you that a Head Start program isn't as good as Scranton School District's program. I would not do that. I think that's unfair. But what I would tell you is, do they have resources? I can tell you that Head Start, pre-K counts programs are very, very successful. And they have they offer a number of options that schools will never be able to offer, such as wraparound services for families that we can't offer in our program. So I understand the emotionality attached to this program. And I also understand that there is a need to look at how we prioritize. And if you'd like to, we can bring the providers in, because I know that Anna's worked very hard with them and has discussed it. They can talk about their programs with you. We can do that.
If I might say something, I'm sitting here, and so many of you have seen me speak at school board meetings, and it's not, I am not comfortable doing it, but I have to say, as a 3-year-old preschool teacher, I've been in this district for 26 years. My heart is broken, and I am offended that you would say that our program is not successful and the test results don't show it. I have given you evidence after evidence after evidence. It's been collected. For the students that attend our preschool program throughout the district, 48% on DIBELS, and DIBELS is done throughout the state, throughout the country, I believe too. 48% score at or above benchmark. But those who attend our preschool program, 71%, that's 48 to 71% score at or above benchmark on DIBELS. For first grade, it continues from 58% to 75% of those who attend our preschool program. And for second grade, even second grade, 60% of those students who attend, who go to our school district score at or above benchmark. But yet 74% of our preschool kids score at or above benchmark. And to presume that a Head Start classroom, and no offense to Head Start or anyone else, but you can ask our kindergarten teachers, where the top students come from. They come from our preschools. You know, and to say that you don't get subsidies for our preschool students, if you are to remove that program from our school, you will still not get money for those students. I just couldn't sit here and listen to it without having to contribute something too. And our preschool program is extraordinarily valuable. Please don't discard it. It is the best thing we have for our district. It is why people come to our city and move to our city, and that is rare anymore. We are the reason why they come. Give them a reason to stay.
So I appreciate your passion and your commitment. I think one of the factors that's missing is we have never done a t-test. We've never done a test on those scores, because what you're telling me is we're assuming that no education occurs between kindergarten, from the kindergarten teachers, from the first grade teachers, from the second grade teachers.
Well,
so
I
we've
can
never
just
done a
tell you-
study, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't do a study. I think that's certainly something that Scranton should do, because I think it would have value in this community to look at that, doing a real scientific study based on the students that come to our preschool.
Well, I will tell you that this data has been collected at the beginning of the year school data. So the kids that came from our preschool program to kindergarten, that's them. It's the beginning of the year. It's after the summer, right after the summer. As soon as they come to school, they get the DIBELS scores. They are tested immediately. So those kids go from 48% at or above benchmark. Ours are 71%. That's right. Just as soon as they walked in the door, 2019-20, this school year, they came in, they were tested. Remind you, 48% of the kindergarten kids at or above benchmark. 71% of the ones that we taught, the ones that came from us, are the ones 71% again at or above benchmark. And they are the ones, when I walk by all the kindergarten classrooms, they are the ones in the high group.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. I so appreciate it. Obviously, I'm very passionate about it, and it's such a great program. I think we do a disservice to the whole entire city and the district.
Mrs.
Thank you.
Goodington, this is Tariani, and this is such a hard forum to have this discussion on.
I know.
It really is. It's so hard.
And I don't have my speech in front of me.
I know, and I don't have a speech either, so I know what you're saying. And have we talked to the kindergarten teachers that are having
love for you
to come
that
in?
Would be great.
The ones that have come from our school district program and the ones that have come from other programs. Like, if we talk to the teachers to find out where our kids compare. I can only speak from experience. Both of my kids went to Willard Preschool, and I can't tell you the positive, all the positives that have come out of it. I mean, I truly believe that the preschool program within the SSD is the reason my kids are so successful. So this is an emotional issue for me as well. So I would really like to know that, in talking to the kindergarten teachers, what their thoughts are on how these kids are coming in from our program as opposed to, say, the Head Start program. And my other issue, Dr. Finan, is my boys would have been in that 13% or the 17 students that were in the middle class that wouldn't have got preschool. I chose to stay home while my husband worked so I could be home with my kids. So we couldn't have afforded preschool, but we were in that middle class. So if the Scranton School District didn't have preschool, my kids wouldn't have gotten it. So that's another issue. What about those middle class people that are just trying to do the right thing? What happens to those kids? They don't get preschool? I understand that I need to think like a board member and understand about the Title I funds and where they need to be used most. And I'm trying to do that, but I'm struggling with taking it away from preschool.
So I just want to remind everyone that the recommendation is not all of preschool going, okay? It is the 3-year-old program. And when I arrived in this district, that was the discussion a year ago. I just want to emphasize that a 4-year-old program would still be operational for next year. Are there other questions?
Yes,
No,
Dr.
we're way
Finan.
past our deadline.
Oh,
Dr.
wait.
Finan, if I can just add to Director Yanni's point that I too am part of that 17 students that you talked about, that my husband and I work in the public sector, and without the Scranton School District's preschool, my children would not have gone to preschool. So it's really upsetting that you're dismissing those 17 children. I also just wanted to make one other point of listening to Mrs. Boland's point about the rebidding. We've already gone through one rebidding with the consolidation of teachers, I believe 2 years ago. And that was hard. And it makes me want to cry because my children were affected by that. They lost a gym teacher, they lost a 3rd grade teacher, and they lost their librarian. So if you are going to take away 3-year-old preschool and have these teachers rebid them, what teachers are going to be displaced into other appointments that my children now have to lose another teacher, another confidant? Thank you.
This is Matt Barrett too. I have some questions. You ready for the questions now?
Yes.
Dr. Finan, under the recovery statute, the advisory committee shall meet with the chief recovery officer at least monthly. Has that been occurring since you've taken over as the recovery officer?
It was occurring up until February. We met it in the beginning of March because of weather. Or
So
I mean, not the beginning of March, the end of March because of weather.
So the recovery, the committee's been meeting every month since last February or so? Or
We've had either tours, we've had communication back and forth.
Well,
we've met in different places.
Under the statute, that has to be held consistent with the open meetings. So I'm just wondering, is that what you're considering a meeting anytime the committee meets, even if it's a buildings and committee meeting of the committee itself?
We've had them open, yes. When we've met at the district office, we've had them open.
And
people have walked in.
But I mean, just going forward, can we expect to see that you'll have meetings every month of the recovery committee and that they'll be open to the public?
Well, I can't answer that right now, given the COVID-19 issue. I'd like to say yes if we were under normal circumstances, but we're not under normal circumstances.
All right, I just recommend that the statute be referenced because it does say shall meet. So if you could just do that, that'd be great. With regards to the plan itself, is it my understanding that basically you presented this presentation tonight and that you're going to be offering an amended recovery plan?
When?
I don't know. That's what I'm asking you. Are you amending the recovery plan that was adopted last year?
Not right now, no.
And are you going to be asking the board to adopt an amended recovery plan?
I can't answer that right now because again, some of what we're dealing with right now with COVID-19, I think will require us to amend it. But at this point, there's been no direction moving forward. It's all very new.
All All right, I don't understand that because I know the recovery plan had a reconfiguration plan that's not consistent with what was just presented. So I'm just assuming at some point in time, you're going to ask the board to consider an amended plan, but that's your call, I guess, if you're standing by the original plan. With regards
No, that's not what I said, sir. I'm sorry. That's
Oh,
not
what
what
did
I
you say?
said. I said
Oh,
we're not
sorry.
doing it right now, but
No, I
moving
understand that.
forward, we will.
Okay, that's what I was asking. Are you going to be asking the board to adopt an amended recovery plan?
I think in the future, yes,
Okay, do you know of any idea? Do you have a time frame as to when that might happen?
absolutely not.
Okay. With regards to, there's been several comments about how the buildings are deficient, the graduation rates are poor, there's all sorts of deficiencies in the district. Under the statute, it seems that it reads that the Commonwealth shall ensure the delivery of effective educational services to all
That's the
students
Constitution, all right.
in the school district in financial recovery. That's section 622A. Have you reached out to the Commonwealth and told them that all these deficiencies exist and asked them what they're going to do to ensure the immediate delivery of the effective educational services?
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
all
And,
right. And
so
what are they telling you to meet that obligation?
boy, I can't hear you. Sorry. Could you ask that a question again?
Sure. When you reached out to them, told them of all these deficiencies and told them that there's a concern about whether or not there's been an effective delivery of educational services, what are they telling you as to how they're going to ensure that that happens in the short term?
So they have provided, what we have gotten from the state so far is you have consulting teams that have come in to help analyze and put together some programs and examine some of.
Dr. Feinen, I
You
don't
know
mean,
what? Could everybody mute their mics? It's really hard to hear because there's a lot of background noise.
You can't call Navarro. I know you can't.
Thank you. What the state has done is to support the recovery plan, the adoption of it. They send in consultants. You heard from 3 of us tonight. We are consultants provided from the state. They have sent in transportation consultants. They've sent in an architect. Whenever we need an expert in a field, the Scranton School District does not pay for it. The state does pick that up. What they do is examine our success or lack thereof and allow us to, they'll provide us with some resources for free. We've gotten some of those. So there are a number of ways. They are not giving it in dollars, in bags of dollars to the district. They provide it in terms of resources.
Are you confident that those resources are ensuring the effective delivery of educational services currently?
Well, we're trying. Am I confident? We're trying really hard, which is why we're saying we need to put more resources into K-5. I'm not happy with those test scores. I'm not happy with the graduation rates. I'm not happy with the lack of number of students who take AP exams. I think that's a critical way for our students to gain perhaps college credit and go to some of the universities they would prefer to go to. So I'm not happy with that. And so part of this plan is for us, the consultants, to look at where can we find the dollars to use those in a different way to help build our program. And that's why one of the recommendations about the pre-K-3 program, so we can put more resources into K-5 in the area of math and English language arts.
What I'm just not understanding, under section 622, it says the Commonwealth shall ensure the delivery. And so when you say we, are you saying we, the Commonwealth, is trying to do this, or are you saying we, the citizens of Scranton?
No, I'm saying we, the consultants that are hired by the Commonwealth, are helping to ensure that. That's what I'm saying. That's
Okay.
our task, to look both at the financial issues as well as the educational issues. And that's why we're bringing before the board this particular option, so we can strengthen our math and our reading scores at the elementary, or put more resources there.
And maybe you can give us some assurance and some confidence. The consultants that you're talking about are PFM and yourself, and PFM and yourself were the ones that presented the recovery plan last summer. So with the big changes now, as Gus Fahey indicated, we've seen some dramatic changes now in the building cost. Not clear why some of us, saw such a change in the buildings that were, reviewed by PFM last summer or last year in the December 2018 report. Can you tell us why we should have such confidence in you and PFM to ensure that this most recent draft, which seems to be different from the previous draft, is a better plan, and that you folks have come up with the best plan forward for Scranton?
Well, let me go back and address the issue at Armstrong. I think maybe this will help. The issue at Armstrong, as Ian said, we found that there was a lot of water, moisture in the air, and created an environment that grew mold, and it was massive. It was throughout the whole building. In trying to find out where that water was coming from, because it was literally dripping from the ceiling, we found that when the district hired a energy consulting firm that came in and did some energy conservation on the HVAC system, we found that it was, for lack of a non-scientific term, it was jerry-rigged. And what was happening was the water was literally dripping out of the HVAC system, running into the carpet and growing mold. Now, that was caused, it's my opinion, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an engineer, but we did have engineers come in and say the cause of that water coming out of that HVAC, all out of those HVAC systems, was caused by the changes that were made to those systems, okay? And those systems, no one knew when the engineer and architect went through the buildings and did the initial evaluation of what it would cost to bring Armstrong up to code. That was not known. That hadn't been done yet.
Are you talking about?
So that was something that was done to the system that created a major problem in that system and created mold throughout that school.
When you say architect, you're talking about 2012 Colombo architect, or are you talking about a different, more recent event?
No, I'm talking about the energy conservation group that they brought. I'm not talking about Palumbo. I'm talking about an energy. It was called Constellation, and I think there were a couple other names to it. But that we found last summer, 2 weeks before school opened. So that was an unknown that was done. And that's why when Ian talked about the cost escalated. Those systems had their heating and cooling systems. And in the summer, the cooling, just condensation, for lack of a better term, just created this stream of water that went in and created the mold throughout that school. So that was something that wasn't known when it was first examined. Remember, some of those estimates were done in 2012 and 2015. And since that time, other things have happened to the buildings.
I understand that, but those estimates, the 2012 and the PFM report from December 2018, were specifically incorporated into your plan last summer. So I'm trying to understand, we adopted a plan last summer based upon the recommendations that you made, in good faith, we assumed, and based upon good information. It seems like the information you had last year wasn't that great. So why should we have confidence that the information you have now is any better? And the PFM report, from my understanding, didn't incorporate any environmental issues at all. So we've just dealt with 6 months of environmental issues. So how can we have confidence in these recommendations if you're not getting good information and ultimately passing them on to us?
I think you raise a really good point, which is that you have very old buildings that are in very bad shape. As we go through them, we're finding more and more significant issues with them. Ideally, we would have spent a year to 6 months doing an update to the facilities study, but they're quite expensive, and there were other issues in front of that. Plus, it was not we didn't have the resources to do that last year. We had to go with the information we had, and then we did essentially what I would call a review of that. That's what we did last year. We asked an architect and experienced school building engineer and others to review and update the 2012 study to give us the best possible estimate we could have at the time. That's the way these plans work. You have to go with the data that you have. One of the reasons that we suggested in tonight's presentation that we thought that it was important to update the study was exactly what you're saying. But we're in a situation where we're going to have to build the tracks while we're running the train. We can't stop dealing with the buildings, as you just mentioned, the issues that have happened over the last couple of years. We're going to have to make the best judgments we can on the buildings we have with the information we have, and we'll improve that over time. But it's not a situation where we can stop, freeze everything, and get the basic, get all the basic information in a perfect way, because frankly, the day after that study is done, it'll be different again in any case. So it's helpful to have that additional information. We need to get it, but we are not able to stop bringing the buildings into compliance and doing the other things we have to do to make them habitable and safe for teachers and kids while we wait to do a new study. If I had to do it again, we might have included the recommendation for a new study last summer. And I think the issues that you're raising are a good example of why perhaps we should have recommended that. But I'd be first to say I'm not perfect, and I think we made the best recommendation we could on what we knew at the time, and that's what we're going to have to continue to do.
Well, just regards to that, I mean, now the new plan is going to be presented, and we're talking about the possibility of building new schools down the road. I mean, possibilities are great, but shouldn't there be some definitiveness to it? Like, for example, if Dr. Finan's been having conversations with local representatives or anybody at the state level, and if there's a plan for the location of a school in the northeast part of the city, as she's indicated that she thinks that's where it should be, I mean, wouldn't that be information that you would put out there so people can have a full understanding as to what the long-term plan is? To talk about closing schools, or to talk about consolidating schools without an actual plan, other than a dream or a concept. I mean, has the governor committed money to a section of town to build a school? If so, why don't you tell the people that and let them know? I mean, to do it based upon a plan, with due respect, you're saying you might need more information. We may find ourselves talking about this plan and needing more information. So I just think I'm not opposed to a new school. I'm not opposed to any closures. These are not emotional issues for me. I'm more of a process person. And at this point, I am just concerned about the past process. And based upon the presentation tonight, with so little data as to the possibility of a new school down the road, I mean, it's just so vague. How can anybody make a good faith vote in support of something without some more definitiveness?
So I think our presentation was very clear that in the short term that the district is going to have to consolidate schools and close some schools, and the process for doing that needs to involve the community in some detail as we gain this additional information. I think we also said that right now there's no financial capacity to build a new school. The idea would be, we hope that the district will, depending on what the macroeconomic conditions are and how the district does in meeting its existing expenditures, that those funds would become available in the future. But I don't think we're going to be proposing a detailed plan to build new schools at this point. It's too far out, and right now you don't have any money.
I know that, but the Commonwealth has to ensure the effective delivery, and so the Commonwealth has the money. So it's not a matter of not having the money.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, then tell people that, and
we've been telling you that for a year. That's not news. There's no additional money. This district has gone to Harrisburg and asked for it. There is not additional money.
I'm not looking to argue with you, sir, but don't tell me you're going to build a new school if there's no additional money. I mean, you can't fix the current schools. If you can't fix the current schools with the money, you're not going to have $100 million for a new school, short of Senator Blake, and I see Larry's on the line, or the state representatives or the governor stepping up. I mean, that's a reality.
So,
and I think that's a reasonable thing to lobby for going forward. I think that's an important aspiration for the district. And if we come out of this process with the idea that the community really would like, after we consolidate, to try to improve the location of schools and to fit that in. I mean, there is going to be a point if we are successful in what we're trying to do here, that there will be more money. And that's one of the priorities people have articulated to us, and that's why we included it in our discussion.
And Mr. Barrett, understand that one of the comments that was made tonight was that we understand that the northeast section of the city needs an intermediate school. And I think you're linking that together. We understand that from a variety of things that have happened fairly recently. the size of that school, maybe the repairs to that building, what could they be? There's more work that has to happen. There's more investigations. We're not engineers. We're not architects. Okay. That's not our area of expertise. So that is something that we recognize, that having 3 intermediate schools right now seems to be the will of the people there. We heard that right from the start when we had to close Northeast Intermediate for emergency purposes. So I think what you're mixing up is, we said maybe down the road. We don't have any money right now in Scranton to even dream about building a new building. What we have is a lot of capital project needs. And the way that the state of Pennsylvania helps schools when they build buildings is through a process called PlanCon, and there's a reimbursement process. But you have to have money to even start that process, and this district does not have money. I think at the last meeting, I mentioned that we had $5 million in capital for capital needs. We're talking needing $100 million in capital needs. 5 million won't do anything for us. But I will tell you that the state is not going to give us a check to do that. We have to find the means within our own budget, and our budget is $166 million. So what we're talking about tonight is doing priorities, making choices. We would all love to continue to just live the way we've always lived. This COVID-19 is a good example. That's not how it's going to be. I would love to tell you that we should continue everything that we've been doing in the past and then add on to that. You don't have the money for that.
You're misconstruing my comments. I'm not interested in keeping things the way they are. I'm completely acknowledging things have to be done better. I have a problem with the process. Okay. And I'm not the one who presented the plan tonight that called for the eventual elimination and replacement of Northeast Intermediate. Again, I'm not opposed to that. If that's the ultimate plan, and that's ultimately there's a better plan forward, so be it. But I mean, that was presented earlier tonight in a slide from your presentation. So this idea that you're now going to consider rehabbing Northeast might be a good idea. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's something you got to explore, and I might be open to that. But I thought the plan as presented tonight was suggesting that was seriously something you were considering. And if I'm wrong in that, I apologize.
Oh, no apologies needed. I think it's a work in progress, to be very honest. I think, Larry West, if you're still on, you wanted to say something, and I know you were part of that building committee, if you're there.
Yeah, I'm still here, Dr. Finan. I'm just taking it all in. Listen, I appreciate all the dialogue here. I think I'm just going to say this. I've been with the senator for almost 10 years now, and I know some of these discussions can be very, very difficult, but they're timely. I think that they're long overdue. The discussions about the buildings that are up for discussion tonight, I'll just tell you that I have been on some of those tours, and I've said this at public meetings. I'll just say it here tonight. I mean, I know there's 70 people on this call, but we had toured 5 schools. 3 of them were the 2 elementary centers. One was Bancroft, and it was Adams, and then the intermediate school at Northeast, and they were done right in a row in sequence. And when I left the intermediate school, it had dawned on me at that point. This was in, I think, maybe October, Dr. Fine. I'm not really sure when we toured, maybe October. It had dawned on me that I had just walked through 3 schools in the Scranton School District that I had never been in before, and that I had graduated from Valley View High School in 1987. Don't we do any math here? It was 1987. But it dawned on me at that moment that I realized that the building that I graduated from at that time was 13 years old. And I had no appreciation in 1987 for the building that was 13 years old that I graduated high school from. And yet I was walking through 3 buildings that were close to 100 years old. The doors to your auditoriums were original doors and hinges and brass, and that's where your students are being taught. And I reflected the fact that I had the opportunity to learn in a different environment, and that was 30 some years ago. So Matt, to your point about the plan, I agree. I don't think anybody here is interested in making any decisions that will completely turn the apple cart upside down. However, I have made comments at public meetings that, without a viable plan, there are no monies. The state is not going to throw money at any school district or municipality or anybody else unless you have a plan. Now, that plan may be a 1 or 2 or 5 year plan that talks about rehabilitating some of your schools, and God knows a lot of them need it in your district. But without having a viable plan to replace those buildings, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years down the road, at some point you're going to have that discussion. So I for one agree that there needs to be a discussion about succession for some of these schools. If that means realigning, or if that means closing some and adjusting some of the grades or some of the uses, then I'm all for it. But I do think without having an honest discussion about what the condition of some of the buildings are in, are having a plan, whether it's realigning your schools, realigning your teachers, or finding a way to pay for it, all those things are important. And they don't just come, there's no magical formula that says this is the way it's going to be. It doesn't work like that. And as far as the state goes, I will agree with you, and I know the senator will agree with you publicly, that the state doesn't do enough to support our public school systems. And that's been an argument he's had for the 10 years he's been down there. He makes that argument every single year in appropriations. And it's just something that he lives with. I know that quote that Rosemary, you had said it was in the Constitution. The senator, every time a public education common discussion comes up, he quotes that part of the Constitution. So I'm very familiar with it. But all that being said, I want you to know that I really think it's important that all the things you discussed here tonight, I know it's running late. We're here 3 hours. At least I'm on here 3 hours. I've never been on so many Zooms in my life. I feel like I wake up in the morning and I start on a Zoom and I end on Zoom. But you had touched on a couple of things, and I appreciate you giving me the time to give some of that background here. But I think it's important that that the senator is supportive of the decisions, particularly as it relates to Scranton School District. You had mentioned back in your presentation about the $6 million was the base money that the state had come forth with in the last couple of years. It was 2, then it was 4, and then it was 6. I could tell you that the senator has been adamant about finding additional dollars for the Scranton School District. It has come in dribs and drabs over the last couple of years. But just so you know, the senator is adamant about being a staunch advocate for the Scranton School District, and he'll continue to fight for that money. I know he will. I don't even have to pretend. I know he'll be there for you guys, advocating for you. So that's the one thing. The second thing I wanted to ask was the PA Smart grant. Dean, I think you had indicated you had made application for it. Not sure what the amount was, or if you made application. Do you have that information handy you get over to me that we can follow up for you?
Yeah, I think that's with Paul and Candace and Missy, but I think we can do that unless they say otherwise.
Okay, whoever, just let me know what the amount was, and if you got that application in the queue, see where it's at. We'll follow up for you. And the last thing is, and this goes to the point about the plan that you're just discussing. At one of the meetings a few months back, I had mentioned that there may be some state funding available to help offset some of the financial costs to update that study that you had from 2012. I'm not sure if you were able to get a cost estimate on that, but if you could do that, I'd be glad to run that up the flagpole to see if the state could help offset some of that funding for you.
We'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you. We can do that. Thank you. And please thank the senator for his support, because we are very grateful. And we do need that $6 million. So we're very thankful for that. And thank you for your time and commitment to the committee. I appreciate it.
Surely.
Dr. Finan, I don't know if you've noticed the chat button at the bottom of the screen. Holly Mead very graciously submitted a question in writing there, and I do see another, it may be a link that someone else has shared.
Okay. Yeah, I can answer
Hi,
Holly.
it's Holly. I'm sorry. I wasn't going to comment because I didn't think there was public comment. So I was trying to follow the rules. But do you know the answer to this question?
I do. Our intermediate schools do not get Title I funding. So you asked if so, how much? They don't get any.
Why haven't we applied for that?
And I'm going to go back to Anne if she's still on.
I'm
Anne,
here.
are you still on?
I'm here.
Do you know that answer?
I have no idea. All I know is elementary went school-wide, I believe, 2 years ago.
Yeah. I'm not sure, Holly, and we can get back to you on that. But I think there's certain criteria, and I think it's the most needy, and I think our most needy area right now is our elementary. But we will get back to you on that one, okay?
Thank you. I was researching that recently, and I believe you can do intermediate and high school. And I do believe that most of our intermediate and high school are in the poverty level. So I think maybe our Title I coordinator might be able to check on that as well.
Yeah, we'll get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Dr.
Sure.
Fine, Molly is on this. She can answer that if you would like.
Oh, sure. I didn't know that. Thank you.
Molly?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can.
All right. It is my understanding that yes, our high schools and middle schools would qualify. But in answer to your question, I cannot give you the exact amount, how much they would be able to receive. It is my understanding we would not receive more funding at this time. So the money that we do receive for Title I funding, which is a little more than $4 million, that would not be greater to my understanding. So it would be spread more thin, and I do not know that it would help or not help preschool. Does that help?
Not really. I'm sorry. I need real clarification on that because I've noticed as I'm going through the database of Title I schools, there's a multitude of districts that have elementary, middle, and high school. But maybe someone could explain it clearly with data why. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be rude, but I really don't understand. And this is not the meeting for that, so I don't want to continue.
I think it's a very good question, and we'll look into that and get back to you. But our understanding is that the amount of total Title I funding that this district currently receives is the amount that it's likely to get in total. Different districts use their Title I funding quite differently. Obviously, Scranton's one of the few districts in the state that uses Title I for pre-K, for example. So I think that we're dealing with a fixed pot of money, but it's a good question, and we'll get on that and get back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll get back to you, Holly, on that. Okay, good question.
And you know what? I'll be glad to pitch in on that, and I'll get help from the feds about that question tomorrow.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Dr. Brennan, one more thing. I also feel as though Mrs. Williams asked a question and then another question was asked on top of hers. So Vivian, you may want to connect with Dr. Finan at another time or ask your question again.
Yeah, I only seem to have one here on mine, but I don't know.
I didn't put it in the chat, but I think my two questions were that those 17 children that we talked about, 2 of that are mine. My children's name are Sydney and Sarah that you would be displacing. I would not be able to afford private all-day childcare preschool. So are you making any accommodations for those 17 children that you plan to displace by giving them a voucher, by making some kind of accommodation to people who pay their taxes and own their homes here? And then my second question was about raising Rosemary's question about the displacement of having to rebid. Were you aware of that?
To be honest, I wasn't aware of that, and I'm not sure I really understand it, so I would have to investigate that more tomorrow. Vivian, just for clarification, are you saying that you have a 3-year-old in the program now? Is that what you're saying?
No, my children are in fifth, fourth, and first. However, if this was 3 years ago, they would be my children.
Oh, okay. Are we making accommodations or would we give vouchers? We wouldn't be able to give a voucher. Would we work with the providers? That's why we set up a committee. And the answer to that is we would work with the providers to see what they could do. Do I have an answer for that? No. But a public school can't give out a voucher to go to a private school. We're not allowed to do that. I understand your point, Vivian.
Yeah, and I appreciate your honestness, and just to kind of emulate Mr. Barrett's point, I concur with him. You know, changes and things have to be made, but I'm uneasy about the uncertainty of the plan that you guys are presenting to us, and a lot of his points made me even more uncertain about that.
Could you say which ones you're uncertain about or what you didn't understand?
Just where the information came for the planning. And, you know, as Mr. Barrett and even Gus Fahey alluded to, that the numbers are different, and I understand timing is different, you know, from 6 months ago, but I don't just get the sense that, you know, I get we have to go through this and make the plan as we go, but there's a distrust in the public of the school board and of the school district. So by doing it this way, I don't think you're gaining that. And I'm not an attorney like Mr. Barrett, so I thank him for that. But I just don't think you're gaining that in any of the public.
So I can talk to you about any numbers that were in the plan came from other documents, okay? Or came from test data, came from assessments, came from a feasibility study in 2012, or a review that was conducted in 2018. Those are real numbers, yes, created at that time. Would inflation and other factors drive those numbers up? Sure, they would. And I'll just take one example. We all have lived through the asbestos issue in Scranton. That was not, if that had been identified, it was not known to the people who were examining the buildings at the time. So there was no accommodation for that, or no calculation for that. So I'm not sure I understand why people wouldn't understand that some of these things will change when other things are found. I know, for one example, they put a new roof on a particular building. I won't name it, but they put the new roof on and redid a gym, and then they found this huge leak that's coming down. Well, it would have been nicer to have solved that leak before the gym was put in and before the roof was repaired or put a new roof on. But sometimes things emerge afterwards, okay? It's not a deception. It's not meant to be deceptive in any way. It's just that I will tell you, the records in the Scranton School District are very poor, particularly with buildings. We barely can find any records. So some of what we're talking about probably sounds like it changed, because it did, because more things emerged. No one, and I keep hearing that the plan changed. I'm not so sure I understand that piece, because I think the wording with regard to pre-K, for example, says will transition to partnerships with pre-K providers, something to that effect. I don't have it exactly in front of me. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about it transitioning for partnerships with providers. Nobody's hiding that, or nobody is being deceptive about that. We're putting it out in the open. You know, I can just say that there's no reason to hide anything. We don't have a reason to hide everything. And if, when the plan was written, we didn't know something, well, we're the first to say, well, we didn't know it. But now we can work with the new information that we have. I mean, on paper, it looked like you had a lot of capacity, which you do. In some of the buildings, we could close probably 4 buildings. That's not what you heard tonight. We heard we should look to close one or two of the elementary schools. And part of that is the geography. And part of that is we heard from the committee when we met several times that they want to preserve walkability to schools. So that's why we backed away from taking advice from the committee, backed away from the closure of 4 down to 1 or 2. But again, understanding that that has to happen over time, not all at once. So again, my apologies if you think we were deceptive. That was not ever a goal of ours, and we have no reason to be deceptive.
Yeah, no, and I apologize, like I said at the last board meeting, that it's taken me a level of this catastrophe, if you would, to become a more involved citizen. But as you can see, I believe Mr. Barrett put in the right side. I think up until now, and it speaks kudos to our administration, I don't think the public was given the opportunity and given the proper knowledge based to become more involved. So I think moving forward, we can't look back. I think moving forward by having these publics meeting, by having such candid conversation, I think gains that trust in so many. And I appreciate you saying, I don't know, or I'll look into that. So thank you, Dr. Finan.
You're welcome. Thank you. Other questions?
I do have one.
Sure.
It's Tom McIntyre. I have children in the district. My wife's a teacher in the district. Just a couple of questions on the preschool, but then real quick on the Armstrong issue. Where you said there was some leaking there after an engineer worked with the HVAC. Has anyone looked into investigating if there was something not done correctly that possibly the district could get some funds back
Yes.
for what happened there?
Yes. That is under investigation and it's in the proper hands.
Great.
Yes.
Great. Then just following up on the 3-year-old preschool. Both my children went through the 3-year-old and 4-year-old preschool. They're now a sophomore in high school and a 7th grader at South, and they're doing fantastic. I think the program has been excellent. I think the teachers are fantastic there. But I'm also on the finance side in school business. So I understand you have to make some tough decisions. And I think I don't want to be in the board shoes right now, but I do see my wife went through the bidding process twice. She worked in Audubon, where my 2 children went to preschool, and then again when they start doing the furloughing. So it is not a fun thing for the teachers or for the district and the community. But again, we look back at the financial side of it, and you do have to make some choices. If we're not going to cut this or cut the 3-year-old program, where else are we going to cut, or where are you going to cut, I should say? And then going with about the bidding, if I'm not mistaken, the teachers teach 3-year-old in the morning, say, and then the 4-year-old in the afternoon. So if you're only cutting one of those programs, you're not really reducing. You may have to reduce a teacher or 2, but you wouldn't have to maybe bid all the elementary teachers again, because you're only downsizing class sizes.
Mm-hmm.
Just my thought.
And you're right about that. It wouldn't be certainly all of them. And we actually found some classes that were very, very small in nature. And so we would be, look at those class sizes and make sure that they are at capacity, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And now where I work at, we've never had a preschool program. It was always outsourced to Head Start. But they actually use some of our rooms in our buildings. Is there talk there? I know you want to consolidate buildings, but if they can't find room, the district can provide room if necessary, just to give some ease to the parents.
Yeah, I think there actually would be an issue with our union if we did that. So that would be
That's a very good point.
problem for us. But I do know if there were buildings available, Head Start is interested and does have available or would have available funds to make them accessible for the students and make them usable. I do know that came up in several of our meetings. So that is something that they would look into. In the interest of time, because I see how late it is, I do see some comments on the chat, and Mr. Delpre, are you still on the call?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am, Doctor.
Is this chat, can I have access to this chat tomorrow?
Yes, you can.
Okay. What I'd like to do is, since it's recorded there, we will get back to everyone who asks a question, not necessarily just a comment, but anyone who asks a question, we'll investigate and get back to those people. But I do know, Ms. Gilmartin, that it's very late at this time.
Yes, it is.
So, and I want to thank Dean and Ian.
Question at the same moment, so very good.
Thank you. I want to thank Dean and Ian for their participation tonight, and I hope that it was informative, and I thank you.
Wait, I have a request. Will that PowerPoint be sent to the board members, or can it be?
It can, and it's
Okay.
also going to be on our website. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Finan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Delpre, very
Anytime,
much.
Commissioner.
Really appreciate your help tonight. And you did a wonderful job.
Have a good evening.
You too. Thanks.